I am Matthew Encina. I've been a creative professional now for 15 years and working in the motion design industry for about 12 now. I started off as a designer, got into animation, and currently I serve as a creative director over at Blind, which we are in sunny Santa Monica. This is our office over there. So I've been working at Blind now for about almost a decade, and we work on brand strategy, motion design, obviously, brand identity, websites. And I also work at a second company, and this is what Matthias alluded to. I also come from the Futur. The Futur is a content platform where we teach creativity and entrepreneurship. So things from like pitching, how to deal with clients, all the way down to design fundamentals. That's what we teach. You can follow us at The Futur is here on YouTube, and you can go to our website if you want to learn more, thefutur.com. So before we begin, I have something very special for you guys, and it's been 10 years in the making. What am I talking about? Well, 10 years ago was the first time I cut my demo reel, and it's been about 10 years since I've had to cut another one. So you guys are in for a special treat. This is the first demo reel I've cut in 10 years. So here we go. This is just to give you guys a little bit of context of what I do and what I've been working on the past couple of years as a creative director. So that's my demo reel. Thank you so much. It's been 10 years in the making, like I said. That's the last time I cut a reel, so you guys had a fancy little treat there. But as you saw a lot in the work there, so much of it was done with Cinema 4D. That's my go-to tool. That's my favorite tool as a designer, as an animator. So anyway, enough about me. This is not about me at all. Why are you guys here? You guys are here to learn something. And today I'm going to teach you guys how to design cinematic scenes. So an overview of what we're going to cover today. First, we're going to talk about story, the most important thing. Then we're going to get into some techniques in composition and lighting. Then we're going to do a little exercise together where we're going to build a narrative sequence. And then we're going to recap it all in the end so it cements up here for you guys. So let's start with story. Story is the most important thing. This is your cornerstone. This is everything that you guys should be basing your work on. And what am I talking about? Well, I see a lot of experimentation, a lot of work that's going out there, and there just doesn't seem to be a strong foundation of what it is that people are creating. And that's totally fine. I love experimentation. That's how you get better. But when you're working out there as a creative professional, having your story very clear up first, having that direction is going to give you parameters to work within. So you have very strict rules to work within, and you have a goalpost. You understand with what you're making, is it effective? There's something to measure it against. So having a story is very important. And when you start with the log line. In one line, what is your story? I have all of my designers, all of my artists that work with me. Whenever they present their ideas, I have them present it in one line. If they need more than one line to present it to me, that means it's not a well thought out idea. It's too complicated. It just needs to be very simple. In one line, what is your story? So let me give you a couple of examples. So This, as you've seen from my demo reel, this is a frame from Coldplay Inc., which is an interactive music video that I directed. And the story is a shipwrecked traveler is searching the world for his long-lost love. So he's traveling the world, and he's chasing the ghost of this girl, and you as the viewer, it's an interactive experience. You kind of click through the experience and guide him through the world, looking for the ghost of his long-lost love. So this is another project. This is what we did for Xbox One X. This is for their world premiere trailer. And the idea here is, from the core, the most powerful console on the market, beautiful 4K pixels burst out, they thread together and form iconic imagery of their famed characters. So here we have Kate from Gears of War and Master Chief from Halo, all coming together in beautiful 4K. And lastly, this is a poster triptych series that I called Roses Are Dead. This was a personal project exploring themes of life and death, and I represented that through the birth of this rose blossoming and eventually wilting and dying. So it's really important to have a story as you guys are making things, and these are a couple of things to consider when you guys are building your stories. Think about, what is the entire story about first? What are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to say? And what's your POV? Having a POV is very, very important because you're not telling somebody else's story, you're telling your story. So it's very important to have your POV, your flavor, your style on that. Next, what mood are you setting? And how do you want the audience to feel? Because with the work you're doing, you want to elicit some kind of emotion from your audience. So how do you want them to feel? Write these things down. Think about it. Now that you have the big picture, this is now we can get into the individual shots. What significance and purpose does each of the shots have in your sequence? And then what can be edited out while maintaining your message and intent? So if editing is probably the hardest thing to do, it's easy to build this really big idea. It's really hard to edit it down and curate it so that it's a very tight idea. But editing is very, very important. So that's story in a nutshell. I want to get into some composition and lighting techniques so that you guys can see this. And I'm going to break it down very, very simply in a couple of exercises so you guys can follow. So the first most important thing is hierarchy. What do you want the viewer to see first, second, and third? And you got to prioritize what you want the viewers to see, and you can control this. So I have a little demo, a little exercise that I have. This is in Cinema 4D. I just loaded a bunch of these characters from the content browser, which you can access by pushing Shift 8. There's just a catalog of a bunch of things in here. So there's little models, characters, people. Anyways, I just loaded them. Here's a simple scene. There's this gang. I wanted to tell a little story about these gang members walking down the street. The problem is the hierarchy is unclear. I don't know who the mob boss is. I don't know who the henchmen are, right? So just by tweaking the hierarchy, I really want this character here in the middle to stand out and these guys to go back in the distance. So I'm going to simply do that by, I toss these guys into a cloner object, and I'm going to use some effectors to push them back. So I'm just simply using a plane effector here. I'll go to another view just to push them away. And then a random effector to kind of stagger them. So I have them staggered, and I'm going to move my camera really low. And now you can see very clearly we have this character here in the foreground. He's the mob boss. All of his henchmen are going way back. So just by simply tweaking their position, the framing, and then their actual size in the frame, we have a much clearer hierarchy of what we want the viewer to see first, second, third, and so forth. So now we have our mob boss right in the center, and then his henchmen going back. So this is the after, and then this is before. So this is our before and after. So you can see the difference there in terms of hierarchy. Those are things that you can control. Next, let's talk about framing and lenses. Where is the camera and what do we want the audience to see? By simply moving the camera around, we could really control what we are looking at and how we're perceiving the scene. And I have another exercise to share with you guys. So I have a simple scene here. I have a bunch of runners, and I'm using ProRender here. This is a feature inside Cinema 4D where it's semi-real-time rendering using the GPU, and it allows me to see what the final render might look like. So right now I just have a 35mm lens, and we are looking at these guys about waist height, and there's nothing special about this. The gun had just gone off, and these guys are taken off. They're off to the races. Nothing very special here. But I'm going to show you guys, just by moving the camera, changing the lens without animating anything, we're going to have a very different story. So if I change to a close-up camera, where now I'm getting close to the leader of the pack here, now all of a sudden, the story is about this character. I didn't move anything except for the camera and change the lens. It's a 50mm lens now. Everybody else is a little bit out of focus, and we have a hero character that's right here in the foreground. Everybody else is a secondary character. Well, now what if I want to focus on the environment? Well, I could go bird's eye view and flatten things out with a 100mm lens. So I used the much longer lens. Things had flattened out, and now it becomes very graphic. It's about the environment. It's about this overall thing, and we can see this interesting rhythm, this pattern of these characters stacked up here. So this is a 100mm lens looking straight down. Well, what if I want to get really close to the action? Well, we can go extreme. So now I have this other camera really low, right on the floor, sitting on the floor, angled up, 18mm. It's ultra wide. If you use ultra wide lenses, it makes things feel a little bit bigger and exaggerates all the details in here. So now I have an 18mm lens. It's ultra wide, and now it's just about the action. It's not about the characters at all. Maybe this is the moment when the gun just went off and the characters are, the runners are off to the races. So now it's about the action. So as you can see, just flipping through these very quickly, I didn't animate anything. I'm just moving the camera and changing the lens. Yet we have a very, very different perception on the scene. So here's a little cheat sheet for you guys in terms of lenses. If you go ultra wide, so these are things anywhere that's under 35mm and under, these are ultra wide and they exaggerate the details. They make the space feel bigger. If you use a long lens, these are things like 85mm and above. It sandwiches elements together, making things very flat. And by simply adjusting the camera, you can dramatically change the angle of or focus of any given moment. So now let's talk about perspective and implied lines. These are things that are either physical or implied, and lines dictate how the viewer's eyes travel. So this is a style frame that we created for a pitch, and as you can see, the primary focus is this truck right at the center, and it's driving through this football field. But what's happening? Why are our eyes magnetized to this truck here in the center? Well, if we break down the invisible and physical lines in here, we can see that there's this one-point perspective where all of the perspective lines are pointing right at this thing at the center. And then here at the top, we have these physical lines, which are created by the stadium, that are pointing right at the truck. So if we look at that again, our eyes just magnetize right here at the center, and this is why. Here's another style frame that we did. And as you can see, there's this interesting rhythm. There's this like zigzag pattern that's going from the top of the frame all the way down. So this is what it looks like. We're doing this little leaf action where we're moving down and across the frame. And the reason why is because we have this graphic element coming here on the top right that's leading to this character. This character has his eye line that's implied going to this mid-ground character. This character is looking and shooting back at this character over here. Then his gun is pointing at these guys in the back, and then there's this little pattern going back. So if we look at that again, you have this little leaflet pattern that's going down. So we have this interesting rhythm that makes the frame very, very dynamic. Next, let's talk about lighting. Lighting controls the mood of the scene and how we perceive the subjects. So this is just as important as a camera, but lighting really dictates what we're looking at. And so when you guys are lighting your scenes, you got to think about your subjects that you're lighting. Are they friendly? Are they evil? Are they sly? Are they mysterious? Do you want to hide or reveal specific details about them? So I have a little example. So I have this character here who's just lit with skylight. Nothing too crazy. It's just evenly lit all the way around. She looks a little angry. She had a rough night last night, just like me. And I'm just going to show you just what playing with the light, we could drastically change how we perceive her. So if we turn on a side light, all of a sudden she looks very, very determined. So I'm just using her, lighting her from the side, right here, from her right side, and just pointing an Omni light right at her face. So now she feels very, very determined. Well, what if I want her to feel ominous? Like how would I light her? Well, I could light her from below, and then all of a sudden she has this underlighting. Let me crank that light up here. And she feels very ominous. They do this in a lot of alien movies, or sometimes in old horror movies, they would do this underlight. So the way I'm lighting her right now, I just have this very small area light, very thin, that's just pointing right up at her face. Well, what if I want to do the reverse? If I put a light above, what's going to happen? Well, all of a sudden she feels very serious, right? So you have this cool area light that's right above her head, and it's pointing straight down. And she has these, what we call like raccoon eyes, because the brow is casting a very deep shadow, and it's masking some of the details on her face. So now we can't see her eyes. So she feels a little bit more mean. We don't know what her intentions are because we can't read her eyes. So lighting drastically changes that. Next, what if we want to make her more mysterious? What if I want to hide more details? Well, I could rim light her. So now it's just about this silhouette. It's just about this figure that's standing in front of us, but we have no sense of what her identity is, who she is, and now she's very, very dark and mysterious. So all of these examples so far have just been using black and white lighting. What if we play with some color? Color is a fun way to code your scene. And this was inspired by the end of Star Wars: The Force Awakens. There was that scene where Ben Solo and Han Solo are facing off, and you don't know what side Ben is on. Is he going to go to the light side or the dark side? And they had this blue lighting and this red lighting that was casted on his face. Brilliantly done. And after a discussion, after like 5 minutes of talking back and forth, we noticed that the blue light goes off, and then all of a sudden he becomes the evil Ben Solo, and he kills his father. Sorry if I spoiled that for anyone, but it's too bad because you should have seen the movie by now. But so you could play with duality. You can start playing with coding the characters and the scenes just by adding some color. So that's very powerful. And then lastly here, we can play with other details. We can hide more details. We can cut the light in interesting ways. I built this after the idea, like where sometimes they do this in spy films, where one of the characters gets home, and then through the darkness, you see the headlamps of a car drive by, and then the lights flash through the blinds, and then you see a figure appear out of there. So this could just be a way that we use to reveal a character. So I built this little set of blinds here, just with a little cloner object. So I have a plane, and then a cloner that's repeating it, which is just cutting the light. And I have this spotlight that is shining through it right at our character. And for those of you guys who are using Cinema 4D, there's some really cool tools that you could use to light your characters. So one of them is the lighting tool. So this is something that Matthias had taught me I had never known. So if I push Shift-C, I could pull up any of the commands and just search for them. So I'm going to do lighting tool. So if I have my lighting tool and I go to my character, I could say, you know what, I want the lighting to hit her in the front, or maybe over here on her left side, or maybe on her chest. So what it's doing is it's just redirecting my light, reorienting my light based off of where I want it to hit. This is very, very powerful in terms of trying to direct the lighting and where you want the lighting to hit exactly. My second favorite trick, or my favorite second tool, actually is using the light as a camera. So if you go to camera, and then you go to set active object as camera, now I am looking directly through the light as if it were a camera. I'm just going to turn off my blinds here real quick. So now, this is acting like a camera. Let me switch to my selection tool. So if I move this, you can see that the light is also moving. So I'm just looking through the lens of the light. And this is a really fun way to light. This is actually my favorite way to light because I could direct where exactly the light is hitting. So if I want it more rim lit, it's there. If I want it to peel around to the front or do side lighting, I can do that. And I can just move it just like any other camera, so I could get really close and light this character. So these are both very powerful tools in terms of lighting. That was the lighting tool, and then using the light as a camera. Just make sure that when you're done with this, you turn off, you get out of that and just go back to default camera so that you don't break your lighting later. So that's lighting in a nutshell. So let me go back. So my next rule, this is my golden rule. If you guys could only walk away with one thing today, it is this: contrast. Contrast is the easiest way to make any frame more interesting. And when I talk about contrast, I'm not just talking about values. I'm talking about everything. I'm talking about the shapes, the values, the sizes, the colors, everything. And if you use extreme contrast in your frames, it's an easy way to make things look more interesting, a little bit more dynamic. So I have an example for you guys here. Let me pull that up. So right now we have this scene. Important and unimportant. The hierarchy is not clear. It's a very boring frame. And there's no difference between these two characters, unimportant and important. But if I push the contrast, and what I want to do is make important stand out and unimportant recede back, I'm just going to play with their scale. So this is where we're starting. And here's a little tweak. Very simple tweak. All I did was push the contrast extremely. So now important is standing out, unimportant is receding back, and I have a much more dynamic frame. And I did this with type for a reason, because I feel like a lot of 3D artists or any artist who doesn't feel like they have that rigorous typography training, they get scared of typography. But my little trick to that is if you look at type just as you would a character, as any other object, it's really not that daunting. If you treat it the same way, you could frame typography the same way that you would any character or object. So contrast. Make sure you guys are pumping the contrast on the shape, the values, the sizes. This makes your frames more dynamic instantly. And just by utilizing contrast, you're able to control the viewer's eye and define the hierarchy, the movement, the depth, and sometimes give it meaning, like we saw there, important and unimportant. So those were all the basics. Those are all very fundamental things, but I thought it was important to share and break those things down one by one. Now we're going to do a little exercise, and I think this part's going to be fun. Now we're going to look at a scene and find some interesting shots, just exploring with the camera, the position, the framing of that, and play with some lenses. And my goal for this is that we're going to create a sequence together today that tells a story. So I have two setups. The first story we want to tell is a Western shootout. And here's the log line. There's a bandit in town causing a ruckus, shooting up the place. And the local sheriff has to step in and set things straight. So that's our story, and we're going to start creating some frames around that. So I'm going to jump back into Cinema 4D. And I have this Western set. This is something that I just downloaded from Daz 3D. It was very inexpensive. Maybe I spent like 30 or 40 bucks altogether. Super inexpensive. It's this cool little Western set. So we have a nice town. And then I have my two characters here. I have this bandit. He's all laced up with bullets. And then I have my sheriff over here. So what I want to do is I'm just going to start playing with cameras and start framing this shot so you guys can see how I would do it. Before I do that, I just want to set the mood a little bit. I want to make sure it feels like sunset and that the sun is just about to come down on these two guys. You can see in real time what this render is going to potentially look like. It's a low sample, so that's why it's a little noisy. The way I created this, I just have a sky, a big HDRI that I downloaded online. And then I have this infinite light, the sun that is pointing down, casting these nice long shadows. So again, my goal here is to figure out and start just building some shots. So you know what? Let's start with some nice, wide, establishing shots. I feel like with these Western films, it always starts off where the town gets scared because these guys are about to shoot it out. So everybody's like running, closing up shop, closing their windows. So let's pretend we are in the POV of one of the people in town. And maybe we're on this deck up here, and we're getting to see these two characters. So I'm just going to drop a camera in here. And you're going to see over the next couple of minutes that I'm going to work very, very loosely. And the whole goal is not to get too committed to any particular shot, but just explore very freely. So right now, this is a 36 millimeter. I'm going to change this to 24. I want it to be a little bit wider. And I want to capture these two guys in the frame here. So this feels pretty good. This feels like we're looking down at these characters. So I'm happy with this camera. I'm going to make a new camera. I'm just going to control drag this or command drag this if you're on Mac. And I'm just going to explore some more. So I'm going to move the camera around. I want more of these establishing shots. Maybe we're on the rooftop. Maybe we're in the POV of a crow or something looking down at these guys. So This is actually a pretty cool shot. I like this. It's almost isometric looking down 3/4. This is a nice wide shot, so I'm happy with that. So I'm going to make another camera. Oops. I'm going to jump in here. You know what? And then let's get closer to these guys. Oops. All right. So now what I'm doing is I am trying to position the camera here so we're really low on this deck. I keep penetrating the geo on here, so that's why we keep flashing black. But I think this could be really cool. We're ground level, where you set the camera right on the floor. Now we're looking up at these characters. So let me straighten this out a little bit. Let me angle this up. Yeah, I like this shot. Now what we're doing is we're juxtaposing these two characters facing off with each other, right? We get a better sense of their relationship to each other because they're definitely facing off. So we have some cool camera here. All right, so I feel like I have some interesting establishing shots. I want to start focusing on my subjects. I want to start giving them a little bit of character. So I'm going to make another camera and I jump in here. Let's start with our bandit. Let me zoom into him right now. So for me, I'm just looking for interesting features, details on him that might be interesting to frame. So first, maybe let's focus on his face. He has a cool face here. And you can see I have some live depth of field that is happening right now. What I can do is I want to actually focus on his face. So there's this cool trick here in Cinema 4D. If you go under Object and Focus Distance, there's this little clicker thing. I just learned this from the C4D guys earlier. You could just click where you want it to focus. So now I'm focusing on his face. Or if I want to focus on this back building back there, I just click. And it adjusts the focus for me. So this is a fantastic tool if you're pulling focus, if you want things to knock out. So this is a cool face. I like this kind of like straight on look. I like that his eyes are covered here. He's a little bit mysterious. So he kind of looks like a little bit of a badass. But I want to focus more on his details like I was saying earlier. So I'm going to make a new camera. I'm happy with that. Let's focus on his profile. You know, I want to flatten out some of these details and make him feel much bigger in frame. So right now, this whole time I've been using a 24mm lens. Let's go longer. Let's go here. 100mm is pretty cool. Let me pull focus on his face. Yeah, that's really cool. So now he's cutting the frame in half, and he's just looking off into the distance. So this is a cue when we're cutting. So now we know he's looking at something off in the distance, and this might be a good way to cut over to our other character. So let's start establishing some shots around our other subject, which is our cowboy, or our sheriff, rather. Let me go back out to a 35mm lens, and let's start looking over at our guy over there. So as you can see, I'm just making a bunch of duplicates of cameras. Normally, I would name all of these things because I'm very particular about file hygiene, but for the sake of this demo, for the sake of speed, I'm just leaving it as is for now. So now I'm establishing our character here, this sheriff. Oh, I like this. I like that he's kind of backlit. He's really dark. He's just more of a silhouette. This is a pretty cool shot. But I want him to feel more heroic. Maybe let's look up at him. That's a pretty cool shot right there. You know, I want to line him up on the third. So there's this very cool tool in Cinema 4D. Let me turn off Pro Render because you could see it in here. If you go to composition, there's all these cool grids and everything. I'm going to turn on crosshair so I know where the center is. And I'm going to turn on the grid. So now you could see the rule of thirds just pop up here. And I just want to align this guy on the third. So if you guys are interested in the theories behind rule of thirds, that's a very common composition grid that people line up on. And the idea is that if you just line stuff up on this rule of thirds, things just look automatically better. So I'm just lining him up on the third right here. I'm going to turn Pro Render back on. And now we have a pretty cool mysterious shot. I even like that he's out of focus a little bit. It makes him more mysterious. So now let's build more cameras around this subject. I just want to frame him in interesting ways. You know, I feel like as he's walking into town, I don't want to reveal him right away. So all of the shots that I'm building right now, they're not necessarily in order. Right now I'm just exploring, and I'm going to go through my workflow after this of how I'm selecting the sequence. So let me use a longer lens, maybe a 50mm. I want to focus on his boots, like him walking into the town. Focus on his spurs. Like this is a pretty cool shot. You know what? You know what I also like doing? I like shooting through stuff. So maybe there's a piece of geometry somewhere here, if I back up, that we can shoot through. Ooh, that's dope. That was by accident. But that's what's fun about exploring with the camera here is that, you have this cool scene, and if you just move the camera around as if you were in a physical set, there's so many ways you can explore and find things. So you know what? I want to make this a little bit of a longer lens, more zoomed in. Let me go 85. Now we're talking. I'm really liking this. And you see our character is like starting to enter frame. This is a pretty cool shot. Maybe this is one of our early shots that we're introducing him. So that's pretty cool. Let me get him in here. So I'm just going to orbit around just a little bit more. And it's nice to have these foreground elements, extreme background elements, and sandwiching stuff in the midground. It just makes your shots a little bit more dynamic. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to move on to another camera. So again, I'm just moving around. I'm just exploring. I'm not treating anything too precious. Oh, now I think we could start focusing on their relationship. What's the relationship between the bandit and our sheriff here? Because they're going to face off. They're going to tee off here and draw guns and shoot at each other. So let's focus on this. I like this juxtaposition here. Let me go ultra wide again, just like I did with our runners. So let me go 18 millimeters. I want to make this feel extreme. I can totally see a shot here where we're kind of revealing the bandit from behind the boots, so we know that they're facing off. So this could be a fun tracking shot left to right here. For now, I'm just going to orient the camera pretty low here. So now we have this extreme foreground element here, and then this small character over here. I want to do the same on the other side. I'm imagining they're looking at each other. This is the stare down. Now let's focus on this character. So I'm looking for interesting ways to, again, frame our subjects using foreground elements, background elements. Oh, there's something here that looks really cool. So now I'm trying to frame our sheriff inside the context of our bandit. So let me pull focus on our sheriff over there. So this is very interesting. This is super cool because what I've done is now this cowboy feels like he's really small in frame and maybe he's in danger. And in the foreground, you see the itchy trigger finger of our bandit, and he's getting ready to pull the trigger here. Speaking of which, I want to show more of those details and just really build up the tension. So with any story structure, all it is building up tension and releasing it, building up tension and releasing it. So right now in this sequence, we're trying to build up some tension so that there's some drama, there's something to focus on. So this is cool. I want to focus on this guy's trigger finger, and I want to make it feel a little uneasy. So the ways you can do that is you can just find and put the camera in unusual places. Right now, the camera's just sitting on the floor looking straight up. And, I'm going to Dutch the angle just a little bit. So now it feels a little bit more uneasy. They used to do this in a lot of old films. Whenever they Dutch the camera, it changes the orientation, the ground plane, and it makes things feel a little bit more uneasy. So now I have this extreme angle, 18 millimeter lens, very wide, and I want to focus on this itchy trigger finger of our character. I want to make the depth of field even more extreme. Right now, our f-stop, our aperture, is 8. The lower this number is, the wider the aperture gets. So I'm going to go 1.8, and you're going to see the depth of field goes extreme there now. Now it's really, really shallow, and it's just about this trigger finger right here. So now, I feel pretty good about this sequence of shots. So I have a bunch of cool establishing shots, getting closer. We got some medium shots. Now we're showing our characters and starting to establish them. I feel good. So what I would do from here is I would send this to the render viewer. But because I don't want you guys to watch paint dry or grass grow, I've already pre-rendered all of this stuff for you, and I'm going to show you guys my workflow to build out a proper sequence. So now that we have a bunch of frames, let me close that. I'm going to open up Bridge. Let's see if we have that here. Adobe Bridge. Okay, I'm opening that up. And the reason I want to open that up, no. Okay, perfect. So I use Adobe Bridge to figure out my sequence, and here's why. So I'm just in the folder of where I kicked out all of my renders. Everything, like I said earlier, is just out of sequence. There's no particular order that I built these things in, but what Bridge is good for is that I can just dynamically move stuff around, and they stick. So this is good for me if I'm trying to figure out, which shots I'm going to use, where I'm going to start, because originally I thought I was going to start with a really wide shot, looking at these two characters. But maybe I want to start a little bit more ambiguous. Maybe I want to start on the sheriff coming into town. And then maybe I want to focus on, well, who's looking at this sheriff? Well, maybe it's our guy over here. And now we can give them some context by showing a wider shot between the two. Then we can cut in this character who's walking across, and then we can finally reveal our sheriff and the juxtaposition between the two. So I like using Bridge because I can just dynamically rearrange things. And if I want to save this sequence, all I have to do is select everything. Let's say I'm happy with these things. I could right-click and then batch rename. And when I batch rename, I can give it a custom name with a custom sequence number, so everything's going to be in order if I'm opening this up elsewhere. If I'm building an animatic, I can name all of this 001 all the way to whatever the highest number in the sequence is, and I could load that into something like After Effects or Premiere to cut an animatic. If there's anything I don't like, I always have this folder that it says no, meaning I don't like it, and I just dump it in there. And I just save that for the archives because, sometimes this is my process of editing down. I don't need to use every shot in here. I only need a couple, and I just need to use the key shots that are going to tell the story, build the tension, and frame my characters in an interesting way. So if I go back to my sequence now, I've put this together, and this is our sequence. So instead of opening on a wide shot, we're opening on this really tight shot of the bandit. His eyes are squinting because there's sun in his eye, and he's looking off in the distance. What is he looking at? Well, he's looking at this mysterious figure that's walking. He's out of focus, but he's walking away from the sun here. His boots are clinking and clacking every time he takes a step. It's almost like Desperado. I don't know if you guys remember that scene when they first are talking about Antonio Banderas and he's like walking out of the shadows. It's kind of like that same thing where we're not showing who the character is. We're trying to build up this tension and this mystery around this character. Then we cut back to our bandit, and maybe he's a little worried. His eyes are really open here. And now we finally reveal what he's been looking at. This is the sheriff. He's come into town. He's like cracking his knuckles. He's ready to throw down. Now we have this wide shot. We're establishing the juxtaposition of these two characters and their position against each other. As you can see, the town is cleared out. There's nobody here. That's because I didn't download those models, but also because they've run away and they are scared and they don't want to get shot. So now we're trying to build up, again, more tension. This is that low shot looking over at the sheriff, and then the reverse, the sheriff looking over at the bandit. And then we have a nice wide shot here. Like, again, maybe this is a crow in the tree. It's cawing and then flying away right before they're about to throw down. And now we have this, it's getting closer and closer to that moment where he's about to pull the trigger. His hand is moving closer. We see our sheriff. He's framed in very tightly. He feels like he's in danger here. Then we cut to this extreme shot of the trigger finger of our bandit here. He's ready to draw. Then all of a sudden, bang! I didn't create the rest of the sequence. I'm going to leave that to your guys' imagination, but I just wanted to show you how I build a sequence, how I explore cameras, and how we could put that all together. So I have one more exercise for you guys, just to show you a very completely different context. So the story here, I called it The Exchange. And the idea is that there's two agents that are meeting up after hours in a discrete diner location to exchange top secret government information. So I have another exercise. Let me open that guy up. So I have this diner location. These two guys are sitting here, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to explore with the camera. And the way I lit this, I just want to show you guys so I could break down all the lights. First, I started with a skylight, which is just this HDRI, which is a big globe that's circling our diner. This is our whole diner set right here. And then I started with this key neon red light. And I did this because I wanted the characters to feel a little mysterious, especially this character on the right. I wanted him to feel very silhouetted. I just wanted it to be about his figure right there. So that's why I had this red neon light. I'm imagining there's a neon sign right outside. Maybe it's the sign for the diner. Then I have a blue moonlight, which is coming in from another direction, which is just filling in the table. We get a little bit of this bounce going back up into their faces, and I thought this was a nice, cool way to complement the warm lighting. And then lastly, the information that they're trading is on this little iPad on the desk. So that's why I put a little light source there. So now we have some very dramatic lighting in this scene. And with Pro Render here, you can see that I can just zoom around and I get a really good sense of what the final rendering might look like. I know it's very noisy, but that's because all of the lighting is very, very low. So it's still calculating. But what I want to do is I just want to explore. Again, same thing. I'm trying to establish what are these two guys doing here and what is their relationship to each other. So first, I'm going to start with a couple of wide shots. And you know, I'm always inspired. I don't know if you guys have watched Breaking Bad, but they always do these cool opening shots when they cut into a spot coming from like a weird moment. Sometimes they start like up in the lamps or up in the rafters, or they're focused on something really, really weird. So for me, I'm going to start the camera up here in the ceiling, and I'm going to go ultra wide. Let's go crazy. Let's go 12. So we have this extreme angle. I want it to feel uneasy right off the bat. So I'm up here, maybe this, I love this element in the foreground, which is just one of the lamps overhead. So I thought this is a pretty cool shot maybe to start on. So we're up here in the ceiling looking down at these two characters. So I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to duplicate my camera, and I'll work on more establishing shots. Again, this is in no particular order. I'm just playing around, exploring, and I'm going to edit these down later. So this is a little too wide. Let's go with a 24 millimeter, a little bit more standard, a little bit more flat. And as you can see, as I'm adjusting this focal length, things get a little bit more flat, a little less distorted. You know, I'm happy with the 24. Let's go back. So maybe we have a shot back here where we're in the corner of the diner looking at these two silhouettes back here. So that's pretty cool. I'm going to make another camera. You know, and with these things, I like treating these sets as if they were live sets. So for me, there's this cool little stool here in the diner that I'm just going to position my camera on. And I'm just going to sit it on top of here. But I want to be much closer now. I want to get a little bit more intimate on this because 12 millimeters, that's, oh, you know, I forgot to duplicate my camera, my bad. Let's go 100 with this. Oh, a little too intimate there. Let's do 50 millimeter. Yeah, this is feeling pretty good. So now I'm just framing this shot. I'm just looking for, again, trying to get a little bit closer and closer away from my establishing shot. And I'm trying to utilize some foreground elements so that I can make my shot a little bit more interesting. So that's pretty cool. You know, let me get it a little bit lower. Yeah, now I get this stool in the foreground. It's helping point at this character here in the middle. And I have this edge element here that's pointing at this character on the right. So now let's establish our characters. Let's focus on our subjects. So I want to focus on this guy on the left first. I want to focus on his face since he's brightly lit. He looks a little nervous here. You know, he's looking out the window because they are trading top secret government information, so maybe he knows he's going to get caught. So let me pull the focus on this character. Again, just clicking with this tool. And I'm doing it from over the shoulder of this other character. I want to flatten this out a little bit, so I'm going to go 85 millimeters. Yeah, now it's really intimate, and it's really about this character here. I'm going to line it up on the thirds. I don't need the guide. I already know where it's going to land. Now, you know what? I want to keep them centered. So maybe something like this feels pretty good. It's also nice to have this part of the seat in the foreground a little bit out of focus. So this is pretty dynamic. I like this character right here. So he looks a little nervous, and he's looking out the window. Now let's focus on our other subject, the other guy who's just a little bit more mysterious. And as you can see, this whole time, I'm not animating anything. I've already just set the lights up. My set is very static, and all I'm doing is just trying to find the shot with the camera. So this guy is very mysterious. He's silhouetted. I want the bright sky behind him. So maybe it's something like this, but I want to get really tight on him. Let's go 200 millimeters. And let me pull the focus on him. So he feels, I don't know, he feels a little shady because we don't really see much details in his face. He's very dark. and he's silhouetted. So now we have this interesting juxtaposition between these two characters. And now let's frame up the reason why they're here, which is they're trading information. So we have our characters, but we could also treat the other objects in the frame as if they were characters as well. So let's think about our iPad here that has the information on it. Let me find that. Oh, it's, my 200 millimeter is throwing me off. Let's go wide. And let me find my screen. Let me click out of here. Let's just do it from here. So now I'm just looking for an interesting way to frame up this subject right here, which is this iPad. So let me make a camera from here. I like that shot. So this is a cool camera, 36 millimeters. That feels pretty good. So it's less about the characters at this moment. Now it's about the information that they're trading. I'm trying to make this a central focal point. So now it's this iPad here. I think we could try another camera where we are from the POV of the iPad now. So let me get really close to this guy. And you'll see I'm just focusing on little details here. Little details that help build the story, help build the tension. Ooh, this is kind of cool. Now if we see these hands, it feels like they're reaching in for this iPad, almost like he has these itchy fingers. Let me go a little wider. Let me go 16 millimeters. Ah, that's pretty cool. So now if we put this from the POV of the iPad, all of a sudden it feels like these hands that are across the table want to reach in for them. So you could treat your objects just like you would any character. So as we're flipping through these, you can see now we have some very interesting shots. So I'm going to jump back into my presentation, and we could see the sequence that we came up with. So first, we're starting with this wide shot up in the rafters, up in the ceiling, looking down at these two characters. And you can see the contrast point is that iPad on the table. So this is where our eye is focusing. Now we have our establishing shot of these two characters. This camera's just sitting right on the stool, looking at these two guys. This guy's looking off out the window, and the other guy seems a little calm and collected, maybe a little mysterious here. Then we cut to our other character over the shoulder of the guy who's trading the information, and he's a little nervous. He's looking out the door, or out the window, rather. And he should be nervous because somebody's watching him. So this is from across the street. I used a 200 millimeter lens, and then I just put this little tube in front of the camera just to simulate what it would feel like if somebody was surveying these two guys. So he has a reason to be nervous. And then we cut to our second subject. Man, he looks super shady, man. He has this little smirk on his face like, oh my gosh, this guy's about to backstab me. So we get a little uncomfortable, especially because with the lighting here, it's very bright behind him, and he's silhouetted, right? Now, all of a sudden, now we're showing the information, the thing that they're trading. This becomes the subject of the frame. They're about to trade information on this iPad. And I inserted this other shot where I did that Dutch angle where everything is off axis, and you could feel it feels a little uncomfortable. Like, why is the world turning like this? I'm starting to build up this tension, remember? Building up this tension so that you as the viewer can lean in, so there's a little bit more drama there. Then we cut back to the iPad where it feels like the hands in the foreground almost feel like they're protecting the iPad, the information, and the other guy is kind of reaching out towards it. And then they're about to make the exchange. This guy cut back to him again, like he feels a little shady. I'm not sure why. Well, boom. Maybe they just got busted. So lights came on. Who knows what's going to happen next? Maybe he grabs the iPad and runs off, or maybe the cops raid the place. I will leave that up to your imagination, but I just wanted to show you how we can build up tension in a narrative sequence like that. So that was our exercise. I just want to recap it for you guys. Again, story and context is the most important thing. It's your cornerstone. You have to build everything off of that. In terms of technical things, hierarchy, what do you want people to see first, second, third, and so on. Framing and lenses is really important. So we could frame up the shot. We can choose what we want the viewer to see from what perspective. Perspective and lines, these are implied and physical things that direct our eyes. So be very aware of that. Lighting is super important, as you saw with the last two examples. It dictates the mood and how we feel about the subjects in there. And then lastly, my golden rule is add contrast. If you see a scene that looks boring, throw something really big in there, throw something medium-sized, and throw really small things. Go really extreme in terms of contrast and utilize foreground and background elements. And lastly, edit down. So if you could remove some shots from your sequence, definitely edit down. It's the hardest thing to do, but it's also the way to make your stories very tight and very powerful. And then as you guys are evaluating your own work, I got this little checklist from Christo, who is the founder of Blind and the Future. So if you guys are building a narrative sequence, go through this and make sure you tick off all of these boxes. So as you're looking at it, is it clear or confusing? Make sure you err on the side of being clear. Is it interesting or boring? Make sure to make it dramatic. Does it flow from moment to moment? If it doesn't, remove the non sequiturs. And then do the moments add up to reveal something new? Because by the end, if you don't reveal any new information, what was the point? Right? So use this to evaluate your own sequences, your own narrative work. So if you guys want more of this, like I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, I help run a channel and company called The Future. You can find us at thefuture.com, and at The Future is here. And I also teach this as part of a course. So this small bit that I showed you guys today is part of my larger style frames course, where I teach you how to put together a style frame, how to put together mood boards, how to talk about your work, how to present that work, and I show you an example of what a pitch deck looks like. So I go through the whole process of showing how style frames play in terms of pitching client work. So check that out on our site. And I'd love to connect with all of you guys here, so you can find me on social at Matthew Encina, and more of my work at MatthewEncina.com. And that's it. And thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Maxon. And thanks for waking up bright and early. I know it's not easy.